Morning Year 10, hello. Welcome to session 9 on English Language Paper 2. Now, we have been reading non-fiction extracts, haven't we, about the film The Greatest Showman. So I thought a really good way to start off this morning's lesson would be to actually show you a clip from The Greatest Showman. And I want you to, as you're watching this, I want you to think about all the freaks, the animals, the excitement, the kind of acts that P.T. Barnum chose to put in the show to entertain people. So here we go.
Where it's covered in all color lights, where the runways are running the night, impossible comes true, intoxicating you. This is the greatest show. We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show. It's everything you ever want. It's everything you ever need. And it's here right in front of you. This is where you want to be. It's everything you ever want. It's everything you ever need. And it's here right in front of you. This is where you want to be. This is where you want to be. Where it's covered in all the color lights.
Okay, that's all you're getting from me this morning on that for the time being. I might play a bit more towards the end. Okay, so you could see from that clip there were lions, there were elephants, there was a short guy riding around on a horse, there was a bearded woman at the end, conjoined twins, trapeze artists, lots and lots going on. Now, if you've already read Source A, you will know that the Guardian newspaper believes that this isn't actually a true representation of what P.T. Barnum was like. Today's question, we are going to have to compare Source A with Source B. Now, in case you haven't read Source A rather, we're going to read through it now, and then I'm going to read through Source B with you, and then we're going to look at what the differences are, because the question here is asking us to use details from both sources to write a summary of the differences in the ways the show and Barnum's choices are shown. Okay, so don't forget this exam paper is called Viewpoints and Perspectives. So the person who's written this newspaper article has a particular viewpoint. They have a particular perspective. So let me make that a bit bigger, and let's just read through that together now. I'll make it a bit bigger still. There we go. Here we go. Source A is taken from the Guardian newspaper and is an article about the historical context of the film The Greatest Showman, based loosely on the life of P.T. Barnum, who curated a freak show circus. Hugh Jackman's new film celebrates P.T. Barnum, but let's not airbrush history. That's our headline. So straight away we can see there's a perspective here. The new film is celebrating this man, but actually it's probably airbrushing history, airbrushing like in a photograph, making it look better, more beautiful, nicer than it actually was. Okay, the actor, Hugh Jackman, has painted the protagonist of The Greatest Showman as a cheerleader for outsiders, but the 19th century impresario found fame by exploiting circus freaks. Everyone loves a good circus movie, and everyone loves Hugh Jackman. His forthcoming P.T. Barnum musical, The Greatest Showman, looks to be a timely celebration of outsiderness and inclusivity, with its bearded women, tattooed men, little people and conjoined twins. His belief was what makes you different makes you special. This is what Hugh Jackman has said about P.T. Barnum. You can be discriminated for that, but if you own up to it and we start to embrace everybody, then it can be what makes life special and fantastic. I think we would all agree with that, wouldn't we? What makes you different makes you special. This is what Hugh Jackman thinks that P.T. Barnum believed. The problem is, the article goes on, the real life P.T. Barnum was not exactly a crusader for social justice. Like many peddlers of 19th century freak shows, Barnum was much more interested in exploiting people than empowering them. So exploiting means to take advantage of someone, in this instance, probably to make money for yourself. Okay, so he wasn't looking after these people, he was using them to make money. And then we've got some examples of the people he exploited. He exhibited strange and savage tribes along with exotic animals. Now, we know that animals aren't allowed in the circus anymore. We don't see lions and tigers and elephants anymore because we understand that it's cruel. And these tribes usually consisted of bewildered indigenous people or fake ones in costumes. So indigenous means the people that lived there before Europeans colonised those countries. So we're talking about indigenous American Indian people, indigenous African people, indigenous Aboriginal people, perhaps from Australia. So he exploited these people. And also faked them, fake ones in costumes. His Caucasian beauties were given fake afro hairstyles using beer. He also exhibited African Americans who had birth defects, affirming their racial inferiority. So at the time, this was, a while after the end of slavery, but there was still a huge amount of racial prejudice, and a lot of white Americans believed that African Americans were inferior, that black people were inferior to white people. And P.T. Barnum exploited this. It says here, one of his earliest hits was Joyce Heth. She was a blind, partially paralysed slave who Barnum claimed was 161 years old. She was actually half that. Now, do you think a blind, partially paralysed slave woman would have any choice? It sounds quite exploitative, doesn't it? And get this, when Heth died, Barnum held a public autopsy, so cutting open the body to examine it, and he charged spectators to watch. Something tells me we won't see Jackman doing that. And yeah, that isn't in the film, is it? Because that wouldn't be entertainment, would it? Oh my gosh. Unsurprisingly, the article goes on, Donald Trump has been frequently likened by political pundits to Barnum, a professional fibber with a penchant for loud rhetoric, fake news and racial prejudice. He doesn't play down the comparison. Circuses and freaks have inspired some of cinema's greatest, strangest films. David Lynch's The Elephant Man, which is brilliant, you should watch it. Jodorowsky's Santa Sangre, Alexei Balabanov's Of Freaks and Men. The best of these films recognise that the sideshow is a distorted mirror of its audience, none more so than Todd Browning's magnificent Freaks, made in 1932, and cast with genuine freaks. Many of them, like Johnny Eck, the half-boy, and Prince Randian, the human torso, were former Barnum employees. Browning, an ex-circus performer, shocked audiences by portraying them as sympathetic humans rather than as victims or monsters. The real monster of the piece is the beautiful trapeze artist who fakes love for a dwarf to get her hands on his inheritance, and is fatefully accepted into the freaks' unified community as one of us. If The Greatest Showman is a cheerleader for outsiders and atoning for the sins of the sideshow, that can only be good. But let's not airbrush history. Barnum and his colleagues were the problem, not the solution. They created and perpetuated ethnic stereotypes and cordoned off a swathe of humanity as different. To really do Barnum's story justice, they would be better off making a horror movie. Okay, that's quite an intense, opinionated article, which of course is what this is all about, this exam. So if we're looking at the choices that were made there by that writer, we need to draw up a table. So do that, pause the video, do that now in your books. Source A on one side, source B on the other, and then we're going to make a summary of the differences in the ways the show's choices are made. So on this side, source A, the one we've just read, the types of things that he chose to put in his show. He chose freaks, he chose slaves who were powerless, I suppose, had no choice. He chose exotic animals, bewildered, that quote, bewildered indigenous people, Bewildered means confused. I don't quite know what's going on. So it doesn't sound like he's being very fair, does it? So on this bit, what do I need to infer? Tells us that actually it's not very fair. However, before we can do this properly, we need to read through source B as well, don't we? So I'm going to get source B up on the screen for you as well. Now, you've had this emailed to you on, or rather it's on Show My Homework, so you can have a look at it on there, but I'm going to read through it with you now on the screen. So let's make that nice and big. Oh, what have I done? Okay, nice and big. There we go. Right, so this is quite different. Now, this is, I told you that we were going to have a contemporary bit of writing and then an older bit of writing. So this is taken from P.T. Barnum's autobiography. So P.T. Barnum wrote this himself. These are the words of the great man himself. This is what he's actually written. And this article, this extract rather, discusses his discovery of Tom Thumb in 1842, which is when Charles Dickens was writing. So this is Victorian times. So in 1842, Barnum discovered one of his most famous and profitable attractions, a diminutive child of 5 named Charles Stratton. Barnum successfully persuaded the boy's mother to allow him to exhibit her son, and he brought him to New York. Barnum declared his attraction as being 11 years old and gave him the name Tom Thumb. So he took a 5-year-old child away from his mum and said to everyone, "This child is 11. Look how tiny he is. He's called Tom Thumb." Okay, so this is what P.T. Barnum says. "I had heard of a remarkably small child in Bridgeport, and by my request my mother brought him to the hotel. He was the smallest child I ever saw that could walk alone. He was not 2 feet in height and weighed less than 16 pounds. He was a bright-eyed little fellow with light hair and ruddy cheeks, and was perfectly healthy and as symmetrical as an Apollo." Now, Apollo is a Greek god, perfection, physically perfect. "He was exceedingly bashful, but after some coaxing he was induced to converse with me, and he told me that he was the son of Sherwood E. Stratton, and that his own name was Charles S. Stratton. After seeing him and talking with him, I at once determined to secure his services from his parents and to exhibit him in public. He was only 5 years old, and to exhibit a dwarf of that age might provoke the question, how do you know that he is a dwarf? Some licence might indeed be taken with the facts, but even with this advantage, I really felt that the adventure was nothing more than an experiment, and I engaged him for the short term of 4 weeks at $3 per week, all charges, including travel and boarding of himself and mother, being at my expense." So he took his mother with him. That's okay. They arrived in New York on Thanksgiving Day, December 8th, 1842, and Mrs. Stratton was greatly astonished to find my son heralded in my museum bills, those adverts, as General Tom Thumb, a dwarf of 11 years of age, just arrived from England. This announcement contained 2 deceptions, 2 lies. I shall not attempt to justify them, but may be allowed to plead the circumstances in extenuation. And it says here, justification. So he's going to justify these lies. Okay, the boy was undoubtedly a dwarf, and I had the most reliable evidence that he had grown little, if any, since he was 6 months old. But had I announced him as only 5 years of age, it would have been impossible to excite the interest or awaken the curiosity of the public. The thing I aimed at was to assure them that he really was a dwarf, and in this at least they were not deceived. So he's saying, yeah, all right, so I lied about his age, but he was a dwarf, so that's fine, okay, that's fine. It was of no consequence in reality where he was born or where he came from, and if the announcement that he was a foreigner answered my purpose, the people had only themselves to blame if they did not get their money's worth when they visited the exhibition. I had observed the American fancy for European exotics, and if the deception has done anything toward checking our disgraceful preference for foreigners, I may readily be pardoned for the offence I here acknowledge. So firstly, he says, doesn't matter that I lied and said he was 11 because he is still a dwarf, so I didn't lie about him being a dwarf. And secondly, I lied and said he was English, but so what? It doesn't actually matter where he's from. But it seems like Americans are more interested in things if they are foreign and exotic. So he doesn't seem to see that there's any problem here. If we go back to our PowerPoint, then we can have a look at this table. So source A, I want you to list the different show choices. So you might want to write in here taking advantage, exploiting dwarfs, faking, lying, using people for his own ends. And in source B, this is P.T. Barnum's own one. The only example you've got there is the dwarf, but you can state that actually he does seem to be, on the one hand, maybe being a little bit considerate. He is paying for the boy and his mum. He's only going to have them for 4 weeks, but he does admit to lying, doesn't he? Which one of those seems more harsh, perhaps? I think source A, it seems really harsh. So in source A, you're going to write down, make use of the quotes, the things about bewildered indigenous tribes. And in source B, it's kind of softer and kinder and more gentle, isn't it? I saw the boy, I thought this boy could make me some money, I employed him and his mother. So just pause the video there and get on with doing that. In tomorrow's lesson, not tomorrow's, Wednesday's lesson, I would like you to actually have a go at writing this up. So just spend today planning it out using this table. If I can just show you, this is how I would do it. But this is actually what I'm going to show you for session 10. All we're doing is summarising and inferring. You don't need to use subject terminology or analyse any of the words. Aim to have 4 detailed points. So for source A here, here we go. Aim to have 4 points, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 things you can say about source A. He exhibits exotic animals, he exhibits bewildered indigenous people, he exhibits dwarfs, and he exhibits fakes. Source B is different, isn't it? Because it focuses just on that one child, and it actually looks slightly less harsh. Now this is what I'm going to put up for you on Wednesday so that you can have a go at writing it up, but I thought it might be useful to show you today as well. So this is an example of how you could start. You could say in source A, we're told about how the real P.T. Barnum doesn't reflect the character as portrayed by Hugh Jackman in the film. We're told he wasn't a crusader for social justice and was interested in exploiting people. Okay, so source A is harsher, isn't it? It's all about the exploitation, the bewildered indigenous people, him taking advantage and twisting and faking. But in source B, the choices are presented differently. P.T. Barnum is making excuses. He's making himself out to sound like he's not that bad actually. You know, he's employing this boy, he's paying his mum, he's lying, but they're just white lies, they don't mean anything. So that's your focus, okay? But today, all I want you to do today is just to plan your answer, okay? I want you to have 4 points. If you're struggling with 4, go with 3. Ideally, it would be nice to have 4. 4 points from source A, 4 points from source B. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I've been talking for ages. What I'd like to do is actually end with showing you a little bit more from The Greatest Showman. So that's the end for today. If you want to switch off now, you can. If you want to watch a bit more of the film, then you can watch the end of the song. Okay? Have a great day, Year 10, and hopefully I'll see you in the not too distant future. Bye.
This is the greatest show.